So it is Easter, but it feels like the apocalypse, right? It feels like the end times. I know that this week I watched news of mass graves being dug on Hart Island for the unclaimed dead who have lost their lives in this virus. And the Cathedral Church of St. John the Divine and Central Park itself, even Temple University, are putting up field hospitals and auditoriums and churches and parks. Musicians seem to be dying one by one. Singer of Angel from Montgomery and I Love Rock and Roll, even Lean on Me, have died this week. I know that every time I go outside, I go to run some errands to get groceries or somehow go out into the world, I feel like there is the weight of threat hanging in the air. Feels frightening, even though I know that everyone is doing their best to smile with their eyes so that you can see that they are friendly above their masks. Every time I go out, I feel the weight of threat. Every time I go inward, every time I go into prayer at night and try to connect with what is happening with the rest of humanity, all I can feel is pain. It feels like we are in an apocalypse, which I never expected to have in my life. And while there is fear and pain right now, there's humor too. I don't know how many of you have been gorging on apocalypse humor right now, but the thing that I've been enjoying this week is is the meme that is apocalypse outfits, expectations and reality. Have any of you seen that meme? Where it's like what I expected my outfit would be in the apocalypse, and it's like a picture of Linda Hamilton in Terminator, and she's got like a gun slung around her back, and her arms are super buff. But like what my actual apocalypse outfit is, it's like it's Buffy the Vampire Slayer, but like wearing her sushi pajamas. Um, Apocalypse expectations versus reality, it's like Mad Max, but actually I look like the dude, and like I wanted to be Wesley Snipes in Blade, but actually I'm Tyler Perry in Medea. I'm finding humor in apocalypse memes right now in all of the ways that we are making fun of the strange time that we are in. But what it really feels like is a dying, and not just a dying of human lives, a loss of human lives, but a loss of a way of life. Because I know that whenever we get through the other side of this, we are not going to be the same as we were before. We cannot go back to our life before now, and we shouldn't. There is truly an ending, a dying of the way of our life from before now. And so what about what is there to say about resurrection in the middle of apocalypse? What is there to say? My colleague around the corner from my house, who serves at the Monumental Baptist Church around the corner, the sermon sign on the outside of their building right now is Easter in a Good Friday world. And I'm sort of feeling like that, like we're in a Good Friday world right now. It's really hard to figure out what our message is for Easter. There's a poem by Frederick Kesner that's been speaking to me, though. Excuse me. It goes like this: there must be a death if there is to be a resurrection. There must be a death if there is to be a resurrection. The demise of something in part or in whole of that portion of one's being. Only then shall we see with eyes like new morning light, he writes. Come and cease to be. Let today bow to the kiss of tomorrow's promise. Let today bow to the kiss of tomorrow's promise. There must be a death if there is to be a resurrection. And I think about what resurrection actually means. Resurrection doesn't mean going back to the way things were before. Resurrection doesn't mean returning to the life that was before. Resurrection means new life that is nourished from what came before, but is different. All of the leaves that are blooming on trees around us are not last year's leaves. They are new leaves blooming on branches of history. And I've been thinking so much about the daffodils in my front yard. I have a little postage stamp kind of front yard, as many of us do in West Philly. And we planted daffodils there a number of years ago, and they began to bloom right as the stay-at-home order came into place. And every day I go out and I check on my daffodils and I see which ones are coming up and which ones are dying. We're finally down to just one last daffodil that's still alive. And I think about daffodil gardening when the flowers die, but the leaves are still there for quite some time. And slowly they will wilt and wither, slowly they will yellow and then turn brown. And they make a mess of your yard. Daffodil gardeners have a choice in the death of their daffodils every year. We all have the choice of whether we want to just cut off the leaves at the ground when the flowers have gone past. We can cut off the leaves and our yards will look much more tidy and orderly. But we also know that if we do that, we will have fewer daffodils, maybe no daffodils at all next year, because it's in the leaves' process of dying that next year's resurrection comes into being. Because the bulb beneath those leaves is nourished by the sun and the air and the water that is being brought into those leaves as they are dying. So the smart daffodil grower knows that you must braid your daffodil leaves as they are dying, or somehow bundle them together so that they may live as they die, so that next year's daffodils may be nurtured by the death of this year's daffodils. That's what resurrection is. It's not last year's flowers miraculously coming back to life like zombie daffodils. Resurrection is the next crop of new life coming into being nurtured by the death of current life. So I'm thinking about daffodils right now, and I'm thinking about the world that we live in, the ways of our being which are dying like our daffodils right now. Resurrection will come, but it will depend on the choices that we make in this dying time. If we choose to cut off the leaves of the daffodil, our resurrection will not be beautiful next year. It is in our choices of how we spend our time now in the dying time that will determine the shape of the world to come. So we can choose to hoard right now, or we can choose to help. And we can choose to see ourselves as separate, or we can choose to see each other as support right now. We can choose to collaborate, or we can choose to compete. Our choices in this moment, in this dying time, will determine the shape of the world to come. That is what resurrection is, and that is what the choice that we have in front of us. I think about what there is to say about revelation, renewal, resurrection. All of these things are worth talking about on Easter. What is there to say about resurrection in the apocalypse? The other thing that I'm remembering today is that apocalypse itself doesn't actually mean end times. It doesn't mean a mass die-off, even though most of our zombie movies would tell us that that's what it means. Apocalypse, the original Greek apocalypse, means uncovering or unveiling. It means removing the reality, that fake reality that we thought we were living in, and looking at the truth that lies beneath. So I'm going to unveil, if I can, right now, my fascinator. See if it comes off. There we go. There is truth beneath this false reality that we have thought we were living in. And what I am seeing, what is being unveiled to me in this apocalypse time, is both the injustice of our times and also our interdependence. that right now, all that I am seeing is either injustice or connection. So I want to talk a little bit about each of those. And I want to start by talking about a protest that several of us went to on Friday, on Good Friday. They asked faith leaders and activists to come to the jails that are up on State Road in Northeast Philly so that we could pray in front of the walls of the jails and call our leaders to account, to be able to release as many people who are in jail and in prison as possible. What we know about jail systems is that it's almost impossible to socially distance when one is in prison, that protective gear is never prioritized for prisons, and that once a virus like the COVID-19 virus gets into a prison, it spreads like wildfire. We know that one of the biggest hotspots for this virus right now in the United States is the Cook County Jail in Chicago, Illinois. And so us as faith leaders and activists showed up at the wall of the jail to call on the mayor, to call on the judges, to call on the governor, and more, to take action to release as many prisoners as possible, because a lot of people who are in prison are there because of poverty, because they can't pay for their bail bill, and so they wait in jail. Or they're there for a minor offense, a nonviolent offense. They are not there for the death sentence that they might receive if the virus spreads like wildfire through our prisons. And so some of you know that we're going to be sharing our offering later on today with the Philly Bail Fund. This is so that we can help the Bail Fund get as many people out as possible before this virus gets too bad in our prison system, so that small infractions do not become death sentences in our injustice system right now. When we got to the wall of the prison, of the jails, we stood separated by 6 feet. I was about 6 feet away from my colleague, Hannah Capaldi. And we prayed and we listened to the words of people speaking the stories of their faith traditions this time. And my rabbi colleagues got up and they talked about Passover. They talked about the Pharaoh who let plague after plague hit his people, kill his people, because he was more invested in the enslavement of the Jews than in the safety of all of the people. Plague after plague came, and Moses kept saying, "Let my people go, let my people go." And the Pharaoh waited until 10 plagues had come and gone, until so many people had died before he took action. And my Christian colleagues spoke about Good Friday, about the story of brokenness and betrayal at the end of Jesus's life, when the people who he thought were his friends fell asleep when he said, "Stay with me, remain here with me, watch and pray, watch and pray." And his friends fell asleep and didn't pray and didn't watch and betrayed him. And the story of Jesus then being taken and wrongfully imprisoned, and the governor at the time, Pontius Pilate, calling out to the masses, to the mob who had gathered, pandering to the mob so that Jesus could be crucified rather than let go for being innocent. Leaders pandering to mobs. Wrongful death at the hands of the state. All of these themes from Good Friday were lifted up by my colleagues as we prayed and we called for justice outside the jail walls on Friday. And I know that in Unitarian Universalism, we don't put as much focus on whether or not these stories are all completely true, every detail of the story. Where we put the focus on is how the story is playing out again and again in our lives now. And so I was standing there thinking, am I the Pharaoh or am I Moses? Am I the prophet who clings to his truth regardless of the cost? Or am I the friend who abandons his leader? Am I the jailer who panders to the mob? Or am I the women like Mary Magdalene, like Mary, his mother, who stayed with him through the most difficult times, through his crucifixion and death, who wept and mourned, and then came back to anoint his body to offer him a dignified burial, who bore witness with their presence to the value of his human life. I thought about who I was in that story, in both of those stories. And I thought about who I wanted to be. And in these times, in these apocalyptic times, I want to be like Moses and call for people to be let go before all of the plagues kill us. And I want to be like Jesus and speak my truth to power, even if there is a cost. And I want to be not like the male disciples who left when Jesus needed them most, but like the women who stayed even past his death to bear witness to the worth and dignity of human life. That's what we did on Friday, to bear witness to the injustice that is happening. And you know what? There was a woman there who was with us who had been just let out because the Philly Bail Fund had been able to help pay her bail. And I stood there and wept as she prayed for us in English, and then she prayed for us in Spanish. And as we were there, 4 more men were released. And they walked by us, and I can't even tell you how much I wanted to high five and hug those men as they came out with their little mesh bags full of just a few belongings that they were allowed in with and allowed to leave with. But they were going home, and I saw my clergy friends pass them a couple of bucks to be able to get home, to be safe. And I want us to raise a lot of money for the Philly Bail Fund today so that people can get out. We are prepared to transfer that money this afternoon so that it can be put into play immediately. This is who I want us to be in these hardest of times. This is who I want us to be. I think about the injustice that is being unveiled right now. But there is beautiful, beautiful interdependence being unveiled as well. There's a story that my colleague, Reverend Elizabeth Buki, who serves our congregation in Jamaica Plain, Massachusetts, tells about her dad. Her dad was someone who suffered from a deadly lung disease and almost died right as she was preparing for the ministry. They had had conversations about what hymns would be played at his funeral. Her first stole that her congregation made for her was made from his ties because she thought he wasn't going to be able to live to see her ordination. But he was a candidate for a lung transplant. And one day in December, one night, her family got the call that someone had died, and they were a match. And there were other families that got that call that night too. That one person's life saved her father and so many others. But they went into this period of celebration, but also of hope and fear, and most of all of interminable waiting for the organs to arrive from out of town, waiting to see if her father would survive the surgery, waiting to see if his body would accept the new lungs. And then 12 hours after his surgery, when she walked into the hospital room and saw him looking better than she had seen him in months, she said, "Oh my God, if this moment was all that I had, this would be enough. This would be worth it all. Daye knew this would be enough." But he lived beyond that time. She wrote about their routines changing, their family routines, about how they got used to wearing masks and gloves and endless hand washing and hand sanitizing. And as they got used to this new way of being a family, that she began to think about the family who had lost their loved one so that her loved one might live, and what they were thinking about, how they were grieving and mourning. She writes, "This gift of new life wasn't just warm and fuzzy. It came with disruption and responsibility. Something was forever changed in her family, in these other families who received life, in the family who had lost life." About a year and a half after her dad's lung transplant, Elizabeth was out running and she saw someone who was wearing a Donate Life hat. And she stopped running and she walked up to this man and said, "Hi, my dad is a recipient of a lung transplant. Why do you have that hat on?" And she found out that this man had a brother who had died young and their family had chosen to donate his organs. And the man told the story about how they kept hearing about where parts of their brother had gone. His eyes are in Tennessee. His lungs are over here. His heart, because he was still a small person, went to a child. About all of the life of their loved one that was still a heart that was still beating, eyes that were still seeing, lungs that were still breathing in other bodies. And Elizabeth talked to this man and said, I don't think I'll ever be able to meet the family of the donor who gave my father life. So can I thank you? Can I thank you? And she did. And I'm thinking that of that moment where Elizabeth encountered a stranger and saw in him the life that was given to her father. And this stranger who saw in Elizabeth the life that was received by his dead brother, this daughter of resurrection meeting the brother of death. And what a blessing it is to give thanks for both of those things at once. Elizabeth writes, "We need one another to survive, not just abstractly, but in our flesh, in our blood, in the choices we make to give life, even amidst death." I wonder, she writes, I wonder, would it change if I lived with that knowledge at the forefront of my mind, if we constantly lived with this truth unveiled to us, if my cousin's heart kept your child alive, if your uncle's lungs breathed air into my father's body while he met his granddaughter for the first time. How would I act, she writes, if I knew that we were not isolated individuals, but truly part of each other's being? When I texted Elizabeth last night to say that I was going to be telling some of her story today, she told me that her father's been sending videos of himself singing opera on his porch to his neighbors during this time. Something that he used to do before his lungs became diseased and that he hadn't been able to do for about 20 years. But now he's using those new lungs to sing to his neighbors, even in isolation. My friends, there must be a death if there is to be a resurrection. And resurrection isn't just a warm and fuzzy thing. It comes with disruption and responsibility, with grief and mourning. With resurrection, something is forever, forever changed. And so, my friends, if you are feeling like today is Easter Sunday, but we are in a Good Friday world, know that weeping and mourning is something that is always important, even amidst resurrection. Weeping and mourning is how Easter always begins. It's how it always begins. But it is not how it ends. We're in an apocalypse, and there is no going back. Whatever comes from this time will not be the same as what came before, and that is as it should be. Because what is being unveiled right now is injustice that needs to end. And what is being unveiled right now is interdependence that sometimes we forget. In this time of apocalypse, might we see and right the injustices in our world. In this time of apocalypse, may we see and never forget how closely we are intertwined. In this time of apocalypse, we can choose who we are in the story. We can choose to be Moses and call for the people to be let go. We can choose to be Jesus and speak our truth regardless of the cost. We can choose to be the women who stay with the person we love through the hardest moments, through death, through the end, through witnessing for the worth and dignity of every single human life. Because the women are the ones who received the revelation that the tomb was empty and that Jesus had been resurrected. It is in witnessing to human worth and dignity in the hardest times that we experience revelation. My friends, I hope that every one of us chooses to braid our daffodil leaves rather than cut them off at the root. The choices we make now in this dying time are the choices that will carry forth the shape of the world that is to come. May we give thanks for the death that makes resurrection possible. May we weep for that death. May we choose to braid the daffodils. May we choose to let the prisoner go. May we always choose life. May we always choose each other. Amen. And blessed be.
Hi, I'm Reverend Hannah Capaldi.
And I'm Reverend Abbey Tennis. We are the ministers at the First Unitarian Church of Philadelphia, where our mission is to awaken love and justice in our lives and in the world.
We're so grateful that you watched, and we hope that the sermon connected with your soul.
We also want to invite you to join us for a live worship service every Sunday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. You can always find the link to that service on our website at www.philauu.org. In these services, you'll hear words like you've just heard, and you also get a chance to greet one another, pray together, sing together, and we even hold a virtual coffee hour after services to get a chance to greet some new and old friends.
If you want to support the mission of this community and you feel moved to give, you can do so by going to the website that Reverend Abbey just mentioned. You can find that link below, or you can text 215-709-5095 and follow the prompts to give.
If someone in your life needs to hear these words today, we encourage you to share this video. And again, thank you so much for watching.
We hope to see you soon.